Hello, everyone. My name is Marion Fourcade. I am the Director of Social Science Matrix, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's panel, The Labor of Fire. Wildfires have grown dramatically and they've become hotter and more destructive. The changing wildfire season not only affects those living near wildfires, but also those charged with fighting fires and managing lands on fire. So today's panel is going to be talking about this, and it is part of our California Spotlight series. I want to give a very big thanks to Julia Zizek of Matrix for actually putting this panel together. For those of you who are new to Matrix, we are a cross-disciplinary social science institute at UC Berkeley. We have a number of upcoming events this semester, which include a discussion of Sai Balakrishnan's book, Shareholder Cities, on November 16, a discussion of Neil Flixian's book, The Banks Did It, on December 3rd, and we will also be having a panel on online misogyny on December 13. And you can check our website for further details. Now, without further ado, let me introduce the moderator of today's panel. John Radke is a faculty member in the College of Environmental Design at the University of California, Berkeley, a founding member of the Center for Catastrophic Risk Management. He conducts research in the design and development of analytical methods that assist in recognizing spatial structure, measure changes in complex landscapes, and assess exposure from future climate change conditions. He advances and integrates high-resolution spatial data with data-rich multivariate models to predict the impact on and the consequences of chronic exposure of infrastructure in human habitat over vast geographic regions. So without further ado, I now turn it over to John to introduce the panelists and start the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, welcome to California. We have two seasons. We have fire season and flood season, or sometimes we just have flood following fire season. I came here in 1991, and no sooner had it arrived, we had the 1991 tunnel fire, which was a horrific fire right here and almost next to the university. And it held a record of the most destructive fire for about 17 years. So that was my introduction to California. Today, we have a great topic, labor and the labor of fire. And one might say it's a very hot topic, but it's a very appropriate one. And we have three panelists. We have Dr. Jameson Karns. He's a former firefighter from Southern California, a recent PhD graduate from the UC Berkeley History of Science program, and currently a lecturer in that same program at UC Berkeley. His current scholarship examines the historical movements in wildfire management and how they've manifested in the land management institutions. More broadly, his work explores modern North American land management agencies and the role they have on environmental sciences and the environment. We also then have Brandon Smith. He's the co-founder and chief director of the Forestry and Fire Recruitment program. As an advocate of those impacted by the criminal justice system and environmental injustices alike, Brandon spent 9 years as a wildland firefighter and a forestry technician with the U.S. Forest Service before becoming the director of FFRP, which is that organization I just mentioned. As a former fire camp resident, Brandon brings his life experience to the organization and has spent the last 15 years working with community-based organizations. He is the recipient of numerous leadership fellowships, such as the New Prophets Unlocked Futures, the Just Leadership USA 2020 cohort, Leading with the Conviction, REDF's Accelerator Program, and most recently in 2021, Echoing Green Fellowship. Brandon attended UC Berkeley, studying the African American and Liberal Studies, and is a graduate of the Victor Valley College's Wildland Academy. And finally, we have Dr. Lindsey Raisa Feldman. She's an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Memphis. Her research and advocacy sits at the intersection of identity, labor, and incarceration. And in the past, she's conducted ethnographic research with incarcerated wildland firefighters, examining the lived experience of this complex work. Her current project is a visual ethnography titled In Pursuit of the Good Man, an ethnographic examination of complex masculinities after release from prison. This project combines photo, elicitation, and participatory photo voice methodologies to explore the effects of racial capitalism and normative masculinity during prison re-entry. So I'd like to begin and invite Brandon to present roughly 10 minutes, a presentation of his slides. Brandon. Sorry, not Brandon, Jameson. Sorry, I got that mixed up on my sheet, but Jameson Karns.
That's okay. Thank you for that kind introduction. So with that being said, let's go ahead and lay the framework and get a little bit of the background on the labor of fire management, particularly here in California. So when we look at our state, we have a number of diverse and rich ecosystems. One of the predominant and prevailing ecosystems is what's called a chaparral ecosystem. Some folks may call it the Mediterranean chaparral ecosystem. It's what, if you reside in California, you've seen it. It is the low-lying shrubs and bushes that you see along our hillsides that for most of the year is a nice brown khaki type color. What's really unique about this ecosystem is its relation to fire. So it not only is meant to experience fire, but it uses fire as sort of a management tool. That is, it uses it as a way to defend itself and even reproduce in certain cases. So fire for this ecosystem is not only something that happens regularly, but it is something that it is necessary. Some folks will actually classify this fuel system as light, flashy fuels because fire, when it goes through this ecosystem, happens relatively quickly, but traditionally doesn't burn extremely hot. Now, of course, that has changed and something we could get into. Now, with this understanding of this ecosystem, it's also one of the reasons why we have a rich heritage in native fire management. A number of native indigenous peoples would utilize this ecosystem as a form of pyro-based agriculture. One of the other factors that makes our state very unique is that our fire management legacy, meaning the practice of exterminating fire, engaging in fire prohibition, some people will call it, or pretty much as we'll call it nowadays, firefighting, can actually be traced back to our era of Spanish and Mexican governance. During this period, the Spanish and Mexican governments made a lot of their money off the hide and tallow industry. So they were regulating and dealing with large amounts of cattle that would then be processed into hide and tallow. And it's from the governors of this era, particularly our Spanish governor, Jose Arriaga, at the turn of the 18th century, that begins this prohibition practice. He really starts cracking down on native and indigenous communities in extremely vicious and aggressive ways to prohibit their inherited and well-versed means of sustenance, but we would call it fire management. When California kind of comes into its own, meaning statehood, in developing its own democratic institutions, we see the development of our own means of fire management. So our largest fire management agency, land management agency, is the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. They come into existence in 1885. We also see the development of national agencies within the state, particularly with the recognition of Yosemite as a national park not too long thereafter in 1890. During this period, the development of fire personnel is actually relatively sparse. What exists during the system is a series of fire wardens. And what they do is they're distributed throughout the state, and they're given the special ability to deputize individuals. So meaning they have the ability to approach what were traditionally large swaths of men, unemployed men that were seen as loitering about, and deputize them, meaning now they are firefighters and they need to work with the fire warden, use whatever tools they can kind of get their hands on to fight the fire. On the other side of this conscription-based system is if you don't fight the fire, you can be incarcerated. And so this becomes a practice in the 1920s and 1930s known as the paddy wagon sweeps, where the fire wardens would team up with local police officers, and they would kind of sweep through these regions, and they would tell these young men, you either fight the fire or you get the paddy wagon. So fight fire or you go to jail. This system really kind of gets flipped on its head right around World War II. While much of the public is okay being conscripted to fight over in Europe, to fight with the Japanese, having this forestry official come into your hometown and order you to fight fire isn't something that's very palatable at the time. So through a series of court rulings, this system is overturned. The state, needing large amounts of labor, of personnel, starts looking elsewhere to find the firefighting personnel that they need. First, they look at the Department of Juvenile Corrections for firefighters, and when that doesn't go too well, they then switch to adult inmates. They do get a little wonky at first as they try to figure out the system. The California Department of Forestry and Personnel actually also had a sister bounty hunter program where if these inmate incarcerated individuals got away, people from the state of California would be paid to catch them and bring them in. But I don't want to kind of leave that as the only mark during the World War II period. It's also a period of great innovation. The state at the time was undergoing a series of incendiary attacks from the Japanese, and because of the lack of personnel, we were forced to draw from pools of labor that were extremely untraditional at the time. On the left here, we have the Triple Nickels. They were an all African-American paratrooper brigade, and they were brought back from the European theater and really revolutionized our approach to fire management, not only within the state, but I would say in the nation as a whole. And we also see the involvement of the military in what's known as, we would call them initial attack crews nowadays, kind of the more labor-based, the intensive grubbing with tools and whatnot. We see the use of military personnel for that type of fire suppression as well. So with that being said, I kind of want to wrap everything up here before we hand off to the next presenter, Brandon. So we have a state where fire is not only going to happen, it's needed in many ecosystems. We have developed a form of fire management that is highly, highly vested in using large amounts of personnel to fight fires. It's extremely labor intensive. And I really want to take a minute to define what fighting fire is here in the state. There tends to be two main categories. The first is structure protection. If many of you have seen fire engines, fire tankers kind of pulling up by homes, those are the folks that are really looking to protect the structures from not only the approach, but also, you know, the eventual contact with fire. The other side of fire management, which is something that I'm referring to here, tends to rely more on manual labor. And we call these nowadays initial attack crews, hand crews. And this type of fire management, they tend to be more direct. So they tend to work on the fire's lines. Some of them are called initial attack crews. And they rely on just basic hand tools. And that tends to be how many of our wildland fires are successfully put out, even to this day. And some of the things I just kind of want to put out there for the next panelists, we've really seen a revision of these major institutions that I spoke about earlier. So the reliance on inmate labor, or as we now call it, formerly incarcerated labor, we've seen really switch up. With the passage of AB Assembly Bill 2147 on September 11th, 2020, by Assembly Majority Leader Reyes, this now lets many of these formerly incarcerated individuals expunge their records and receive their EMT credentials, as well as others, to help streamline a career into fire management. We're also, something John can definitely speak to, seeing the use of more sophisticated technologies, primarily the use of drones, not only on a local and state level, but a federal level as well. And so with that being said, I would like to go ahead and yield to the next panelist. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jameson. Now we'd like to hear from Brandon Smith. Brandon?
All right. Yes. So first and foremost, excuse me. Thank you all for the invitation to speak today. Thank you, Jameson, Dr. Karns, for your information. I actually learned a few things. My name is Brandon Smith, and I am the executive director and co-founder of the Forestry and Fire Recruitment Program. The presentation I have in front of you, Forgotten on the Fire Line. Pathways from prison fire camp to family supporting careers. So why am I here today? We are in interesting times. I believe all of us can say that. And uniquely, we are here right now, specifically with myself, we are here at a unique intersection of environmental and criminal justice challenges within the state of California. So currently, right now, 2021, in November, has already been deemed California's worst wildfire season on record. In addition to that, last year, 2020, was the worst wildfire season on record. Before that, I believe it was 2018. So every year, wildfires continue to get worse and worse and worse and more frequent. There were 8,239 wildfires burning over 4.5 million acres. It's estimated that Californians will spend or lose, somewhere around $70 billion. And there are 3,236 structures that have been lost. A lot of people talk about why. Why is this a problem? Well, there are multiple reasons for this problem. One reason is climate change. I am a believer in climate change, that the world is getting warmer quicker. A second reason for this is a lack of responsible forest thinning. When you think about the days of John Muir, and he writes his memoirs while he's on a horse, just riding through the Sierras and the Sequoias, right? Like if you were to go to the forest right now, that is completely impossible. You can't do that because forests have not been thinned. That's also a symptom of us not burning properly or utilizing fire. Another reason for this challenge is there is just a sheer lack of labor. There is a lack of firefighters. Every year, Governor Newsom and Chief Porter from CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service come on TV and in the news and have shortage of firefighters. It is a very skilled piece of labor that we have not figured out a way to increase the amount of people for. Because there's such a shortage of firefighters within the state, as Dr. Karns mentioned, the state of California around World War II decided to utilize incarcerated people to fill the firefighter gaps. And so that has transitioned to the world that we live in right now. Within California, there are 35 fire camps and fire training centers within the state. And fire camps are basically a mix between a low-level prison, mini prison facility, and a state-ran fire department meshed together that houses incarcerated people. There are currently 1,600 people incarcerated in the state right now who work as firefighters. I would like to mention that prior to COVID, this number was a lot higher. There were annually for the last 10 years, 4,500 people incarcerated in the system every year. This currently makes up 10 to 15% of the state's firefighting force. And these people, we save the state over $2 billion a year, not only in the auspice or in the aspect of firefighting. While incarcerated, we're not just firefighters. We fill whatever labor need, labor gap the state has. So while I was incarcerated in fire camp, I rehabilitated local parks. I worked with Caltrans to thin and clean up the side of freeways. I worked in state-ran water treatment plants to make sure people had clean water. We did search and rescue. When the floods came, we were filling up sandbags. So many different things that we would do, and go out and contract with the federal government to do forest thinning, one of the only groups of people in the state right now who are doing forest thinning. And so we saved the state a whole lot of money. And we look at this conundrum. There's an extreme labor shortage, and there's a standardized use of incarcerated people. And the challenge is that once those people come home, they don't have the abilities to transition into this work once they come home. And that's where FFRP comes in, because FFRP believes that formerly incarcerated people deserve the opportunity to utilize the skills and the experience that they've gained while incarcerated to obtain gainful employment as firefighters once they come home. Just so that you know, so that people are clear, because there's a lot of, especially political thought processes on this. What do you mean that formerly incarcerated people? What do you mean that ex-cons, felons can become firefighters, right? With a respect and understanding that firefighting, at least within the country, is one of the most respected careers in that we know. And there's a thing to think about and realize that, number one, we say that anybody who is in fire camp probably shouldn't have been in prison in the first place. And why is that? Because in order to be in fire camp, you have to be deemed what's called a low-level offender. No serious crimes, no murder, no kidnapping, no arson, no sex crimes, right? You have to go through a physical training regimen, right? And you have to go through the in-class training regimen. And if you don't pass those classes, those trainings, you don't have the ability to do the work. So when you talk about these people in a fearful way, please realize that these are low-level offenders who have taken the same trainings that you have to go take while, if you were doing this professionally. So FFRP, that's why we are here. Our solution, FFRP is a nonprofit organization that helps the people currently and formerly incarcerated in fire camp transition into gainful employment within the sector once they come home. How do we do that? The first thing that we do is we go to all 35 fire camps and training centers and we outreach. We call it inreach. Myself, having a lived experience being incarcerated, and so many of our staff, we go to these fire camps and we dispel the myth. We say, hey, did you know that there is an opportunity for you to continue to do this work once you come home? Because while incarcerated, a lot of people don't realize, even to this day, that there is a pathway to do this once you come home. So we say, hey, don't you know that you can go do this work once you come home? Secondly is we prepare them for release. Once we prepare them for release, we're sending them job descriptions. We're helping them with warm handoffs to different reentry agencies. We're helping them to get a draft of their resume of their work experience as firefighters. Once they come home, we operate a workers hub for gainful employment. So we do monthly application workshops, resume writing workshops, interviewing workshops. Part of the firefighting world is a bit of who you know. So we take them to local fire stations so that they can go hike and train and meet the staff. And then one of the innovative pieces is people, one of the biggest things that people coming home from incarceration need is they need a purpose and they need a job, finances, you know, very straight up. And so one of the things that we've been able to do because we meet at this unique criminal justice and environmental need, is we provide transitional subsidized employment through our pre-apprenticeship program. And it's so interesting because what we do is once people come home, we provide in-class training to them. So we recertify them in all of the classes that they need. And then we also provide paid on the job in the field training, where we actually do defensible space projects, which is clearing out around people's homes to protect them from fires, like in Lake Tahoe or like in Big Bear. We also contract out work with the state, homeowners associations, local counties to do responsible forest thinning. So we tackle this problem in two ways. In one notion, we're training the next generation of firefighters, and we're also providing immediate fire prevention support to the state of California. And another thing that we do is we provide legal support and whole person care. We've partnered up with the University of Southern California. We've partnered up with Cal State University San Bernardino, and their MSWs provide one-on-one case management to people. And we've also partnered with the LA Legal Aid Clinic to go help out with AB 2147. What was mentioned earlier is AB 2147 is a law that allows if you have been formally incarcerated in camp, you have an option to do an expungement of the charge that sent you to fire camp, with the thought being that folks like us have the opportunity to go get EMT licenses. Just so you know why that's important in firefighting, there's pretty much a glass ceiling that you can reach to in firefighting if you don't have your EMT. And so an EMT is like a rock that shatters that glass that allows people to provide more service and support. And so pictures you'll see here, excuse me, are pictures of us going out to the camps, us doing our in-class training, and us doing our fire prevention projects. So our theory of change, we provide people with the inspiration to explore the career, with the support to prepare themselves for the career, and the resources to thrive once they get the career. We're not an organization that just wants to get people jobs, but we want to get them a career that they love, that transforms them, their families, and that they can continue to grow in. And so we help folks out, as I mentioned, pre-release by inspiring them, help them with their resume. We identify what needs they have. We operate our Workers Hub that does virtual trainings. We work with probation and parole to help folks out. We do our workforce preparation through a fire academy and career training, financial training, our pre-apprenticeship program that I spoke about. And lastly, I want to say that FFRP is here to provide a very unique solution to these challenges. So we have formally announced it, but I do want to let you all know that FFRP was recently approved to launch and operate its own private fire department, and we are doing so. As Dr. Karns mentioned earlier about the triple nickels and the use of military folks, Black folks, incarcerated folks in the early 1900s and 1940s, like the triple nickels, there was also a group, the Buffalo Soldiers, who helped out with wildland firefighting themselves, a group of all people of color in the military. And they were, excuse me, they were charged with going to save a town of all white folks. And at one point in time, the people in the city did not want these people to help them to fight the fires, but their city was going to be overran. And so in all despair, they allowed the Buffalo Soldiers to help them and actually save the town. And it's noted that these people after this work said, hey, you know, I didn't realize this group of people were able to do such great work, but now I'm indebted with them, like with my life. And I thank them so much. It really changed their mindset. So we are launching our own private hand crew called the Buffaloes in honor of the Buffalo Soldiers. We are a 20-person initial attack hand crew, as the good doctor mentioned, that is able to be contracted on a federal to a private level. And we have recently been dispatched to fires. This year, we were dispatched to the KNZ complex in Central California and to the Caldor fire, one of the biggest, if not the biggest fire within California. And I know I'm running out of time, so please, moderators, let me know. The last thing I want to talk about is our impact on workers. We really feel like we've come together as a community-based organization with different partners to create a very unique and creative solution to these challenges that we believe and we know that the state of California and local government agencies can look to and build upon. We look at Matt Hudson. Matt Hudson was one of FFRP's first cohort graduates. He paroled home in 2016 after doing 5 years of incarceration in fire camp. I'm proud to say that he currently works for the San Bernardino National Forest on their Helitack crew, which is a group of firefighters on a helicopter. Crazy stuff. And he is their senior firefighter and accepted a permanent position with them. I want to talk about Otia Rogers, who recently paroled. She did 2 years in fire camp. She finished our pre-apprenticeship program. And now she's a seasonal firefighter on the El Dorado National Forest. So if you're in Lake Tahoe, you may see her. And then I want to talk about Miguel Ortiz. He did 3 years in fire camp. He graduated our apprenticeship program while having a full-time job as a security guard. And he also works with the San Bernardino National Forest. And over 80 people that we've helped thus far, actually the number to date is like 126 formerly incarcerated people have transitioned like this. There are so many great stories. We've helped people to work for the U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, multiple different agencies on a federal, state, and county level. So I just want to say thank you all for the time I have here. FFRP is always here. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. We are always looking for partners to build. I will say that our work is currently based in Southern California. Go Bears. We actually secured a partnership with Berkeley Forest. So thank you all. And also a philanthropy partner where FFRP will be expanding our career training program to the East Bay area this time in 2022. So thank you. And my last words are formerly incarcerated people deserve an opportunity for gainful employment to support themselves, their families, and transform their communities. Me being formerly incarcerated, I used to think of myself as a public nuisance. You know, all of these terms of felon or convict, they weighed on me so much, especially coming from Cal. And I found something in firefighting. I found a way to use my talents and my skills. And now look at me or look at these people who have done a complete 180-degree shift, who are now public servants. I just want to say it's possible. This transforms communities, and thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Brandon. And now we'd like to hear from Dr. Lindsey Raisa Feldman from University of Memphis.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for letting me be here. Pulling up my PowerPoint now. Okay, great. So can you all see the PowerPoint, hopefully? I can't see you, so I'm just going to go with yes. But thank you. It's really an honor to be here, an honor to be on this panel. And to be perfectly honest, Brandon's last words in some ways kind of also encapsulate my PowerPoint. And you know, I feel very much like I'm learning so much from both panelists. I'm kind of furiously writing over here for the past 20 minutes. So yeah, I'm going to be speaking about the experiential paradox of prison firefighting and its implications for carceral justice. So first, before I explain what that means, I'm going to kind of contextualize who I am and what my project was. I am an anthropologist, and I study essentially the relationship between a person's identity, both their personal identity and their social identity, and incarceration. And I do that now at Memphis, but I began that work in Arizona at the University of Arizona. And I know this is a spotlight on California, but I guess I'm also going to just shine a little spotlight on Arizona too, as its neighboring state. And also really kind of an interesting point of difference maybe that can garner some questions perhaps. But in this project that I began about 5 years ago, I started thinking about the relationship between incarcerated wildland firefighters and their perception of risk on the job. That was kind of my initial question I had as I began my ethnography. And then I spent 15 months fighting wildfires alongside 3 incarcerated crews in Arizona. I did get my red card and did my best to fight fires. I was mostly mostly the person they had to take care of. But I was out on these crews for about 15 months, and my project really changed, and my frameworks changed, and my advocacy changed all through the ethnographic experience, which is one of the wonderful things about anthropology. One through line between what I initially started thinking about and where I kind of ended up is this critical examination of prison labor as an institution, and prison as an institution, and its effects on people. Again, this kind of relationship between incarceration and punitivity and identity, right? That critical examination, that critique of prison labor, I think Brandon said earlier, anyone, I wrote it down, anyone in fire camp shouldn't have been in prison in the first place, right? This questioning of why the system is what it is, and moreover, how this affects the people who are in it in very complex ways, right? So that is a through line through the course of my 15 months. What changed and where I kind of ended up is that I began to see the IWP, which that's the acronym in Arizona, the Inmate Wildfire Program, through an ethnographic examination of the lived experiences of people who do this work. It's a chance to actually center incarcerated people in this critical analysis and in the eventual policy changes, advocacy spaces for incarcerated labor. And what I kind of ended up discussing a lot and seeing in my research is this reclamation of identity, this kind of reclaiming of the self against the logics of incarceration and against the dehumanization of incarceration that's kind of inherent in the penal institution and in most prison labor programs. So, what's kind of the broad premise of, I guess, this talk in some ways, and also my dissertation work, which is this is my dissertation work, is that prison is often seen as a monolith, right? In media and even in academic space, it's kind of envisioned like punishment is doled out the same way in every institution, and also that assumption is made about the folks who are inside, that they experience prison the same way. And to me, that does a disservice on all sorts of different levels. First, if you see the prison as just this monolithic thing and not a processual thing and not something made up of people creating rules, rewriting ideologies and policies, you don't get to see the cracks in the foundations of imprisonment, and you don't get to see maybe where the light shines through those cracks and you can make substantive change. Another thing that it misses is the individuals who are inside, right? The lived experience of incarcerated peoples who are complex, full, rich human beings and have identities that are certainly impacted by incarceration, but are not fully subjugated to incarceration. And so shifting kind of that framework to understanding the nuance of experience of a prison labor program like the IWP is really what I started unpacking. So what I basically came to, I guess, think about was the IWP as an experiential paradox, which essentially means that it is both an exploitative program and a transformative program at once. And I'm really excited to hear other people's thoughts on this. I always am, either from the panel or from the audience. Kind of any of these things I'm throwing out here are just, points for conversation if you're interested. So let's talk about this paradox a little bit. On one side, we have the exploitation, kind of the a priori exploitation of prison labor. And that stems from, of course, the economic realities of prison labor, the low pay, the lack of reentry support, which Brandon's work obviously is directly addressing, which is really incredible work. In Arizona, especially when I was there, there was nothing like what we just heard about, right? There's really just kind of no pipeline programs or reentry support whatsoever. And there's also kind of more existentially, or at the level that I examine, right, this identity level, there's a devaluing of the bodies and the people themselves who are doing the labor, right? So when we think about risk, we think about, workers' comp issues, death benefit issues, and also the food even, right, that incarcerated folks are eating when they're working really intensively, physically demanding jobs. So this is, again, the one side of the paradox that we can kind of understand. And to be clear, this is stemming from just a lot of data collection, just from being out there with the crews, doing interviews. And as you can probably see throughout this PowerPoint, I used photography as a methodology, specifically photo elicitation, where I would take images and then show images to folks, and we'd have conversations about them. So this was really stemming from my data collection, and the exploitative nature of prison labor was absolutely one part of the story. It's something that people talked about. Folks quoted the 13th Amendment to me as they were, doing various work, which I'm sure you all know, which a crude paraphrase is, enslavement is illegal. Enslavement is illegal unless you have committed a crime, right? So that was bandied about. There's certainly a recognition of this exploitation, but there were other narratives that coexisted alongside this, and this is the paradox part. And these narratives were really powerful, and they really centered on this sense of meaning and of transformation. And these narratives were, emergent notions of the self. So how a person saw oneself as kind of fundamentally different, or at least a fundamentally different iteration of who they were before they joined the crew. And also how different that was from kind of the carceral identity, the sense of categorization of being a criminal, right? Or being a prisoner. So that was one thing. Another narrative that emerged was a shift in perspective of belonging and also of vulnerability, which led to very kind of interesting new identity narratives, new masculine identity narratives. Belonging on a crew, in a brotherhood, and also kind of just being physically outside of the prison for weeks at a time helped to create these narratives of the self. Similarly, there were healing trajectories which impacted all these other types of identity, all this other type of kind of identity work going on. Folks would talk about the trauma of incarceration, childhood trauma together, right, as a crew out on the fire line or doing big, projects. And all of that was really impactful and meaningful. And of course, the work itself, the work of wildland firefighting, is really antithetical to the mundanity and kind of the mind numbingness of incarceration in general. So these are some examples. I know I'm speaking quickly and kind of rushing through a lot of ideas. These were all chapters in my dissertation, so I'm happy to kind of talk more about it and provide examples and vignettes and whatnot. But these are examples of just the other side of that paradox, right? The transformative and exploitative paradox of the lived experience of this program that I found. And really, ultimately, what my analysis and what my framework landed on was how meaning was created for folks who did this work. And then how meaningful work became a meaningful self. And again, to focus on meaning was a really interesting and I think really nuanced kind of decision, but it was born out of my work with the crews and hearing folks just talk about and also experience the really incredibly meaningful work that wildland firefighting is on so many levels that I'm sure maybe some folks can attest to who have been wildland firefighters, certainly the panelists. And then how they kind of take up that meaning, embody that meaning of the work, to reject kind of the dehumanization of incarceration, even though this is still very much grounded and centered in a prison labor program, right? And that's the tricky bit, right? That's the paradox, is that this is a carceral regime, and these experiences are happening within that, but the meaning cannot just be disregarded. And so in conclusion, really, what results from thinking about meaning, right? And thinking about the lived experiences of incarcerated people. I mean, honestly, nothing bad can come of that, right? It isn't kind of centering incarcerated people in this conversation when we're talking about conversations around power and justice and labor. But if we center incarcerated people in policy recommendations, in programmatic decisions, if we use those lived experiences and narratives to advocate strongly for improving material conditions and creating pipelines like Brandon has done, right? And create more perhaps non-labor spaces where this type of creative meaning making and identity work can happen without the labor component, spaces where individuals can relate to themselves differently and have the opportunity to kind of reject the dehumanization of incarceration. Those are all the possibilities that kind of wait for us if we center lived experiences of those who are doing the work. And I guess I'll stop there. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Lindsay. There is one question in the question and answer, and it says, what toxic chemicals and heavy metals are used in the red fire retardant? A little bit off topic, but an interesting question. Is there a non-toxic option? And would anyone like to answer that question? I could answer it, but one of the panelists might want to answer that. Okay, the answer is that there is a one that's considered non-toxic, and it's a FOST-check fire retardant that's being used here in California. And most of it's 85% water anyway. So it's not the pink stuff that flies down from the aircraft. Certainly it's not toxic to humans and animals. However, it can be problematic for fish if it gets into water. But that's not what we should be concerned about. What we should be concerned about is the toxins that are coming off that which is being burned. So it turns out the fire burning the landscape is really the toxic thing. Okay, we have another question. Hi, Brandon. Thank you very much for your work and your presentation. I'm wondering what avenues are available for formerly incarcerated people to gain employment with federal agencies. Also, are there aspects about the incident management system that you would change to better support programs like the CCC? And that comes from Harrison Rain, who is a hotshot firefighter.
Oh, thank you.
A graduate student here at Berkeley. So you got, Corey, Brandon, you got a fellow firefighter there. Yeah.
There we go, for sure. Great question. Great question. So one of our biggest avenues or pathways that we have found to support people is to put folks into federal agencies like the Forest Service, the Park Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs. There is a challenge there where people coming home from incarceration may suffer from different levels of supervision, like probation or parole. And so just dealing with a process like that, for anybody who's been hired in the federal process, the OF 306. So there's a lot of back and forth with that. But the Forest Service has been a great avenue, especially with so many shortages now. Oh, and the incident management system. I think the system could be, yes, I think it could be improved. And I think its improvement is allowing for more training opportunities for people to hop into different sectors. So often we focus strictly on the suppression piece of this work or operations part, but there's logistics, there's finance, there's so many different avenues that people can hop into, administrative, supplies, stuff like that.
Okay, the next question is from Louise Comfort. She asked, firefighting is dangerous work. Is there insurance available for incarcerated firefighters for health recovery from this work? And that could be picked up by anyone. Brandon, do you know about the insurance?
Yes, I do. Okay, so basically, there is not an insurance policy on incarcerated people, and there is like an health policy. Like if somebody gets hurt, the state's going to take care, they're going to foot the bill for, like, if somebody burns themselves and they go to a burn treatment center, the state is going to pay for that.
I have a question, and this goes to Lindsay, the idea of exploitive versus transformative. As you were talking about it, and I was thinking, yeah, that seems really unfair. But then I looked at graduate students, and they fit exactly into the same category. We exploit them, but it is a transformative part of their life. And so I wonder about that paradox. There's a lot of similarities there. And one hopes, I mean, there is no guarantee when a graduate student leaves the university that we may have transformed them, but are they employable? And I think the same thing is true. The paradox is true to those that are incarcerated when they leave Brandon's care, and Brandon does a great job of trying to help them ease into the real world. But are they really prepared to step in and be employable? Or do they come with a stigma because they were incarcerated while they learned their trade? And that goes to Lindsay.
Yeah, Brandon, I would love to hear your answer to that second part. I would say, John, I'm glad you said that, because that was one of the things I had initially put in there, but then cut for timing. And I think I was already woefully long. But I do notice this kind of, these things are not so different, right? And we can see these things mirrored in conversations around labor all over the US. And I think it lends itself very strongly to solidarity and labor solidarity across institutions, right? And the institution of academia and the institution of the prison system. I won't say that they're similar, but I will say that they are both institutions, right? And that's something to think very critically about, and to kind of recognize that there are many similarities that stand as a place for solidarity.
Okay, the next question is going to be to Jameson, because he not only just finished his PhD, he is gainfully employed as a lecturer. So that means he did transition from an exploitive to more of a transformative. But this one comes from Dan Paley, and I want to add a little bit to it. Dan writes, could we make labor constraints less of an issue during fire season and presumably less dependent on incarcerated people if we allocate more resources to off-season thinning, et cetera, than we do to fire season suppression? Now, keeping that in mind, Jameson, before you answer the question, I want to add to that, put in something like CAL FIRE, and I want to know about, over history, I want to know about their priorities and their strategies and how they've changed through time. Because I could show you right now an image from 1939, and I could show you the same image over the same location in 2021. And in 1939, they clearly did mitigation efforts, and they clearly was a safe environment. And in 2021, it is a fire hazard. So go ahead, Jameson.
Okay, so to the first half of the question coming from Dan, thank you for that. Dan, you're absolutely right. One of the things that we hear folks talking about is having a proactive engagement with the wildlands. That does mean thinning, that does mean prescribed burning. And these are skill sets that do need quite a bit of training, certification, and whatnot. They will greatly help out our communities, particularly those based in the wildland interface. But chances are the folks that will be going out and doing the thinning will be our incarcerated camp members. These aren't going to be the folks necessarily from the fire stations doing that. But is it something that we need? Is it something that we need to allocate more funding towards? Absolutely. And John, to get back to your question, when you look at these land management agencies, when they originally came into being, they were hiring lots of folks that were silviculturists, foresters, folks that were going out and proactively managing the land, right? Looking at the health of the land. Over time, what has occurred is the majority of the funding has shifted from these traditional land management departments to the fire suppression side. And now even a lot of folks are recognizing the transition, the name in our own state from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection to just CAL FIRE, right? And so one of the things that has happened over time is we have been, pretty darn good at fighting fire in our state. Most fires, wildland fires that is, will be put out, I think it's 99% will be put out in 1 acre or less. So that's pretty quick. That means our response time is great. That means we have agencies at all levels engaged. these big fires that we're seeing, that always make the news internationally, they are that small minority. And so what has happened over time is, as we've gotten great at this, we've seen what's called a fuel densification over time, meaning that the fuels have grown thicker, they've grown closer together, and it's something that we're experiencing for the first time in history. So that also means that, our crews going out there are experiencing extremely hazardous and dangerous conditions that we've really never seen before.
Okay, good. Thank you. And we have one more last question because we're running out of time here. It's from Chuck K. And he said, lots of good info about history of firefighting. But what about the future? Has there been movement toward the use of drones for firefighting, for example? Maybe I can jump in here a bit. There have been drones ever since the Predator, and a lot of that technology actually developed at Berkeley. There have been drones flying for a long time. But the trouble with a Predator drone flying an instrument called AirDAS, which was to support firefighting, it never got permission to actually fly over a real fire because of the concern that it might get into traffic issues with fire bombers or retardant bombers. And so that was one of the problems. And I don't know if that device, I wish, I know some of the people who worked on that, I wish they were here to tell us whether or not it ever flew over an actual real fire or not. So we do have drones. They do get in the way of aerial missions. And so, no, they haven't been involved very much. But any firefighter will tell you that you can only do so much using water bombers or fire bombers and from the air, that most of the real work is done on the ground, up right next to the fire. And that's how you actually contain, and that's how you stop it on the fire line. And so these crews that Brandon has been part of and training and supports, and of course that Lindsay talks about, the exploitive and transformative times that they experience as they go through the penal system trying to get out there and do this professionally. That these are really the important crews. They're really the important labor in actually controlling a wildfire. And if you don't believe me, go to fire school. It's a horrible experience, but you will realize that that's actually how you stop the fire. I want to thank Jameson, Brandon, and Lindsay for participating today. This has been great, inspiring, interesting. I usually don't do these sorts of things. I'm usually stuck in the laboratory crunching numbers. And so thank you very much. And I'll turn this over to the social science matrix computers are, I guess, to close the session. Thank you.